Good morning, sunshines. So today we're going to talk about a couple of things. The evil B word, and then we'll talk about a couple of positions that deal with that, and then we'll talk about safety. The evil B word, I can see you questioning yourself right now, is budget. One of the things about a stage manager, and again, this is going to be the biggest difference between a professional and an amateur theater. In a professional theater, because everybody's getting paid, money is at the root of everything. You're going to have budgets for what sets cost, what costumes cost, what crew members cost, what spot operators cost. You're going to have actors who cost things. Everything in the theater, in the professional theater, somehow costs money. And because of that, oftentimes there is a man or person called a production manager who will take the burden of overseeing that off of the stage manager for the play. Now, if you don't work with a production manager, and let's say you're in a community theater or some sort of situation, like for instance at university, you really as a stage manager at university don't have to deal with the budget. Matter of fact, I would say you don't even know the budgets, what they are, because the budgets are people are volunteered. They don't cost money. They have their fellow actors, fellow technicians, fellow students that are learning things. If you're in a community theater, they're fellow volunteers. You're going to have people that are acting in the show who are also running the spotlights, who are also helping to paint the set. That doesn't happen in professional theater. Professional theater, those things are different people, and they're under different budgets, and there needs to be somebody to coordinate each and every one of those type of things. So the first thing about a production manager is they're really only going to find them when you are dealing with a professional theater situation. In tours, you are definitely going to have a production manager. The production manager is going to be your contact at the home base, wherever home base is. But in a situation like at the Alabama Shakespeare Festival, the production manager there is the person who negotiates contracts with the unions. So they deal with contracts, but there's another person called the company manager who deals with the individual contracts, if that makes any sense. Whereas the company manager is going to have the actors sign the contracts and are going to take care of things like writers in the contract that may say, I only need green M&Ms, or have the dressing room painted lavender, or whatever the writers are in the contract. The company manager is the person responsible for taking care of those issues. The production manager is the person who negotiates the contract with the unions. So for instance, the production manager is the one who says that we will hire our scene designers under what's called a USA, United Scenic Artists contract. But it is the company manager who has the designer sign the contract and take care of things like having the paychecks available to them on the right dates that are in the contract. Yes. So both of them deal with money. Both of them deal with contracts. One of them deals with the union people. One of them deals with the individuals. Yes. So again, that's the way the division typically happens. Yes. Let's start with the production manager, though. The production manager, first of all, is going to be the right arm of the artistic director. They're going to coordinate the shows together. They're going to figure out if there's a new playwright, if you need dramaturgs, if you need directors, if you need designers, if there needs to be a rep plot, for instance, on lighting. You need to have the same lighting designers on several shows, or the same scene designers if you're going to have repertory scenery, or if you're going to just have separate designers for each category. If you're going to have costume designers, are they going to be pulled? Are they going to be costumes that are built? Are they going to be rented? All those decisions are made in coordination with the artistic director as to the quality and type of show that you're going to do. Again, there are a lot of theaters. The Alabama Shakespeare Festival is one. Texas Shakespeare Festival we have a huge inventory. A lot of theaters have an inventory of costumes that they have built over time that you can pull from. And so if let's say we have done Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, believe it or not, a dozen times. And so we probably not only have one version of the coat, we probably have 3 versions of the coat that we could pull from. Or the producer may say, you know what, I want an all new, rethought out production of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, and we're going to build a whole nother coat. So whatever the decisions are, the artistic decisions, The production manager is then the one who goes out and implements those decisions and hires the individual designers, hires individual directors, hires the stage managers to cover all the positions within the production arm of the team for that show. Once the contract is signed, the company manager is the one who handles all the logistics. Again, before we get to company manager, here's a little video on being a production manager.
You're the facilitator. I mean, and if you do your job well, it's about trying to figure out what each individual project needs and how do you help that happen. Hi, I'm Ruth Sternberg and I'm a production manager. Is generally the intersection of money and the art. There are parameters set on the production, financial, or staffing, whatever those parameters are, and within those parameters, a play is going to be executed. You take that information, figure out what the staffing should be, figure out if you can afford it, and 9 times out of 10, the first time you do the pass, you can't afford it. So then you go back and try to have conversations with directors and designers about what are the pieces that what they've come up with achieves. And then from that point, you can figure out how to get them what it is that they want to get achieved, and then figure out how to do it within the financial parameters. When I was very young, my mother had a children's theater touring company. So I was on tour at the age of 5. Don't necessarily know my mother's motivation for putting my brother and I in the plays. It may have had something to do with babysitting, I don't know. We were doing a production of Rumpelstiltskin, and there was a trap door in the stage, which I thought was the coolest thing ever. And I should have figured it out at that point that I was more interested in what you could do with the trap door in the stage than I was necessarily in acting. After I got out of school, I worked mostly as a stage manager. Because I was a freelance stage manager, I did take some jobs that were production manager, and I really enjoyed that. It gave me a broader look at what was involved in the projects. So I've been the production manager at the McCarter Theater in Princeton and at Trinity Repertory Company for 10 years, which is where I met or started working with Oscar Eustis. When he was offered the position of artistic director at the Public Theater, he asked me to come with him. Usually the artistic director, the artistic staff will come up with a project that they want to do. Either it's driven by a director who wants to do a project or a playwright whose project they want to have done. Usually, by the time I get involved, the director and the writer are already chosen. And then quite often, either I'm asked for budget input or a budget is given to me. At that point, we discuss who the designers are that they're interested in working with. Sometimes directors and designers come with a small idea or part of an idea. And then it's a question of making sure, for me, making sure that I facilitate the conversations that need to happen to turn it into a real idea, because I can't put a dollar value on it until I have designs. Everything's possible. The question is whether or not you have the resources to achieve it. I mean, we've had designers ask to excavate underneath the Delacorte. The Delacorte's built on rock, so you could. We just don't usually have the time or the money to do that. I think the fun part of my job is being able to talk to the designers about what are they trying to do, and then getting to have those conversations that are artistic about why this play needs that piece. I'm very lucky to be at the Public Theater. The difference between here and a regional theater, there are 6 theaters in this building. There's the Delacorte Theater, and we also produce off-site. So there's an awful lot of projects going on at all times. Staffing that can be a challenge. This season, we have 6 shows before Christmas. If we do our job well, nobody would ever think about all of the chores that go into producing a play. I mean, there's trucking, there's lumber delivery, there's a lot of coordination. And I think it's probably more complicated because there's 6 theaters in the building. Every show has its own challenge, and sometimes they're technical challenges, and then there's some like really wild challenges. We did a production of Kicking a Dead Horse that Sam Shepard wrote and directed, and this play has a dead horse on stage that needs to, on cue, fall into a hole. What I didn't know before we started that process is it is now illegal to buy a horsehide in the United States. So our props department had quite a challenge ahead of them. First of all, how would one make a realistic looking dead horse? And we actually bought a taxidermy form and then ended up buying someone's family horsehair blanket that had been made from a horse hide in like the early 1900s, and using that to cover the taxidermy form, and then also putting a motor in the horse so that it would roll on cue to fall in the hole. I see my job more as supporting the people who are working for me to make sure that they get what they need, both in terms of information, resource, access to staff, quite often trying to figure out who would be the best person for a job. I would also say that part of being a good production manager is part cheerleader, that you need to maintain a positive attitude. It can never be about you. It's always about the project. I think it has to be somebody who doesn't have a big ego, because I think you'll just be sorely disappointed. I like this kind of work because I think I'm the kind of person who tends to get bored easily. And once I get bored in a job, I don't want to do it anymore. The thing that I really love about this job is that I know on any given day that I'm going to be challenged and something is going to come up that I never thought was going to happen, and I'm going to get a phone call or somebody's going to come into my office with something to be solved that's going to be fun because it's going to be new. And hopefully, almost always I laugh. I mean, I really enjoy what I do. So I just feel so lucky that I make my living making plays. What could be better?
As you can see, you need to know things about scenery, you need to know things about lighting, you need to know things about costumes. You don't necessarily need to be an artist in any of those one areas, but it is very helpful to be familiar with the type of work that that person does. So a lot of times you can know what questions you need to ask. Do we need a deck electrician? Do we need a spotlight operator? Do we need a deck crew chief? There's just a lot of positions that could be had in any one of those areas that could help run the show in a professional situation. And if you're unfamiliar with how or what dressers you may need or what wardrobe does as opposed to what dressers do. Again, wardrobe typically is the person that washes, launders the clothes and takes care of any repair. Dressers are the people who actually run the show and change the costumes on the actors. Two totally different things, but if you're not familiar with the terminology, you may think you're talking about one when you're not actually talking about that. But they're two separate sets of people. One comes in during the day to do the laundry, one comes in at night and runs the show. Total different time schedules, totally different persons. Now, could they be the same person? Sure. But then you get in the situation, again, of overtime. If you've got a show that runs 7 shows a week, and the show is 3 hours long, and you have an hour for a call and a half hour after to reset things, that's 35 hours for a technician to run a show. If you're IATSE and you want to also come in and do wardrobe, you're getting paid time and a half, which is obviously not as good a deal as hiring someone else who has 35 hours during the week to do laundry for a regular rate. Does that make sense? So again, production manager has to oversee all those aspects and does things like looks at the set design and says, the designer has said we want velour curtains for this. Well, the production manager is the one who then figures out the cost of that item and may say, you know what, instead of velour, we can get the same look with this commando cloth or velourette or some other option that's cheaper. Again, sometimes you ask the designer, sometimes you, as a production manager, just have to say, you know what, we're gonna save $10,000 and go with this choice. Sorry, you can cut the curtain if you want. But it is the production manager's job to oversee the budgets, so that at the end of the day, the show is on budget, both for time, yes, for money, and for persons, the number of crew members you need. Those are the three kind of budget. And again, it all comes down to money, because again, time is money, and people cost money. That's why you have a limited number of them. So ultimately, everything comes down to the money figure, as I said earlier. But really, if you've got time, it could cost less, because you can have more people. I mean, less people do more work. But if you have a limited amount of time, you're going to need to spend more money, because you have to have more people to do more work in a shorter amount of time. Yes? Of course, you could sacrifice quality, but that's up to the production manager. Yes? If you're not going to do it with velour, you're going to go with something different. That's the other aspect you can save on the quality. Yes? Production manager should be familiar with all those aspects and be open to negotiation. They shouldn't be people who are in charge of little kingdoms. They should more be negotiators to make people aware of opportunities, to indicate problems. Where have we overspent? Where have we potentially gone beyond the pale of our theater? That's the production manager's position, yes. Now, a company manager is the person who's responsible for, once the person has been hired by the production manager as an actor, or as a technician, as a designer, if they live locally, that's great. You don't have to worry about housing. You don't have to worry about transportation. If there's somebody who is being brought in from New York or from out of state, you now need to have flights planned. You now need to have a place for them to stay, housing. You now need to have some sort of transportation figured out. You now need to have some sort of per diem kind of thing for cost of food while they're here, that sometimes the theater will provide, sometimes not. But those are the type of things that are in the contracts that the company manager will have to figure out, will have to find time to deal with each member. And again, the more people you're talking about, the more opportunities you have about people who have certain schedules and they have other lives. So it'd be one thing to have a schedule that just everybody just bowed to you and said, whenever you need to be there, I'll be there. But it's another thing in reality, because oftentimes people have to be back to teach, or have to, or in another show. And so you've made the choice that you're gonna have somebody that you're gonna have on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday at your theater, and then Thursday, Friday, Saturday, they go do another show in another space. And you have to coordinate getting back and forth to those two spaces, back and forth, yes? So here's a little video on being a company manager.
Can I pull a seat in row N for our lyricist?
My name is Megan Alvord, and I'm the company manager at Center Theater Group for the Mark Taper Forum and the Kirk Douglas Theater. A company manager is the liaison between the producing entity, in this case Center Theater Group, and the production. A typical day for the life of a company manager is there's no typical day. And it really depends on where we are in the production process. I manage all the artists while they're here working for us. I help manage their contracts, and then making sure that everything in the designers and directors' contracts goes according to plan. Things I can always count on is that every week I do payroll for our union actors, as well as our assistant directors and our production assistants. I make sure everyone's happy, that rehearsals are going well, that they're getting taken care of during their time with us. The most important thing for a company manager to have is a knowledge of what everyone does in the theater. You work with everyone, from general management to production management to press to marketing to designers to directors to actors. So to have an understanding and a respect of what everyone does is really important. Compassion is one of the biggest attributes that a company manager should have. You're trying to support the creative process, and in doing so, support the people that are doing it. I studied stage management in college and went off to have a career in stage management for about 5 or 6 years. And I kind of discovered that I wasn't passionate about it. So I went back to my roots, to La Jolla Playhouse, where I did my internship and learned a lot about the theater, and got started in company management. And I realized that what I really like is taking care of artists. And I was able to learn how to do that on the job, which was kind of the best education that I could get. The best thing about my job, hands down, is working with the creative people. I myself am not the most creative person, but I love being around that energy, and I love being a part of the process in my own little way. My most important piece of advice is to do an internship. It has opened so many doors for me, and I believe that my career would not be where it is without doing that internship. In addition, you learn a whole bunch about jobs that you didn't even know existed, so definitely take an internship.
Again, it's not everybody's cup of tea, but it certainly is an invaluable part of making sure the wheels are greased, I guess is the easiest way to put it, so that everything runs smoothly. Trust me, if you've ever been in a situation where you had a theater with a good company manager, you sometimes don't even know that they're there. But trust me, if you are in a situation where there's a bad company manager and you're standing in an airport and nobody is there to pick you up, you care. You're like, am I supposed to rent a cab? Oh, that's right, you arrived today. And then you get to the theater, it's like, oh, well, we haven't really got your room yet. Can you go down to the hotel and check in? If you'll pay for it, we'll reimburse you. That's not words you want to hear. That's bad company management. Yes? You want somebody who has planned for your arrival, who is prepared, who has sheets on the bed for you, who has towels in the bathroom, who has toilet paper in the bathrooms, who's thought about things so that when you need those things, they're available for you as a visitor, as a guest to that theater. Yes. So again, a couple of positions that are somewhat related to stage management, not necessarily your job, but those people will be around and they will be there to help you coordinate the shows. And again, as a stage manager, if you've got a lot of actors and or designers who are dealing with bad company management, a lot of times it's one of those things where you have to deal with and let the producer know. Again, it's not your job to punish, but it is your job to make aware of the situation, that things aren't being handled correctly, that sort of thing. Yes? All right, let's talk a little bit about health. Last thing on budgets. First of all, just as an idea, concept, if you have a certain budget, let's say you have $10,000 to do a show, whether that be for an individual item or whether it be for the entire cost of the show. My rule of thumb is I budget to 80%. Now, what does that mean? If I were a production manager at a theater and I had a budget, I would budget short so that if in the end you always have some money left to buy the little odds and ends that are coming, as opposed to budgeting at 100% and then not having anything for the little odds and ends that come at the end. Because there's always little things that are just the ideal little, Christmas balls that go on the Christmas tree, or just the things that make it right, that aren't really thought about ahead of time, but it would sure be nice to have some sort of painting on the wall that was of, this or that, or some sort of decoration that was some flowers or something. And so you've got a little money left in the budget to fix those items, to repair those items, to find those items. And so 80% is a good number I have found over the years to budget time, people, money, all that sort of stuff. The other thing is receipts. Receipts. As just a person in life, get receipts. If you are working in the theater and the theater is not in your hometown, every dollar you spend on anything you spend a dollar on is tax deductible. We're going to spend money, we're going to talk about taxes in a couple of weeks. But trust me, it is better to have the receipt and then not use it than it is to say, oh man, I bought some lunch the other day, I wonder where that receipt is. So just get in the habit of receipts. If you, my suggestion is get a credit card, not to spend the credit limit, but it will give you a nice credit report. But the great thing about it is at the end of the year, they'll send you a credit statement if you ask for it, and it will have everything categorized on that credit statement. And so that can be your receipt. Yes, so hotels you stayed at, restaurants you've eaten at, anything you had to spend that you would not have spent on if you had been at home is tax deductible. Yes? So receipts. Did I say that enough? Receipts. It is often very important to know how a business or a theater operates its purchasing system. Some theaters, like for instance at AUM, for major purposes, we have these things called purchase orders, where you actually have to you have to get a quote from a company, itemize the item, have that quote sent to purchasing, which then creates a purchase order for then you to buy the materials. That, as it might sound like, takes time. Again, time is one of those things that's very limited in supply oftentimes. And so if you're going to take 3 weeks to get a purchase order and another week for something to be sent to you, if you don't have 4 weeks in there to get some material, you may have to find an alternative simply because you don't have time to get the materials. Some companies don't take purchase orders, yes? And so sometimes, again, at AUM, they've given us a credit card, but we still need a receipt that we give back. And because we're tax exempt, no one can charge us tax. So again, you need a tax ID number, and in our case, it's 41.506. If you want to know, just to buy something for AUM. There's also a lot of times this thing called petty cash. Oftentimes, the stage manager can be put in charge of petty cash. Petty cash is usually something like 25 bucks that you can have for small little purchases. If you need batteries for some headsets, or if you need something, some Band-Aids in your box of Band-Aids just run out. Those type of purchases that you need pretty quick that don't cost that much. Again, receipts. And you can try to get it without taxes, but it might be worth 35 cents just to get the Band-Aids. But those are the type of things that you may have to deal with as far as money is concerned. Yes? All right, the rest of the day we're going to spend talking about health and safety. First of all, health and safety, even though this seems late in the semester, are paramount. If something cannot be done safely, it cannot be done. There was a production of Spider-Man on Broadway that actually injured a couple, I'll just say injured, I think 4 different Spider-Men. They had real technical problems developing that show. No one's life is worth a piece of theater. It is, after all, a play. So having things secure, having things that work, trusting no one, covering your own butt, yes, but also making sure that everything is done safely, and then having thought through the process if things don't go safely, how to prepare for things that happen and what the procedures are in case things don't happen well. First of all, there is this thing, any material that is manufactured for consumption in the United States of America is required by law to have this thing called an MSDS report. It is a material safety data sheet. All you have to do is contact the company and request that, and they are required by law to send you a material safety data sheet which lists all the ingredients. Doesn't have to say the percentage, but it does rank them from the first item that is in the list is the one that is used most. You'll find, for instance, in most beverages, water is the first thing listed because that's the first thing in most beverages. And then they'll add flavoring, and they'll add color, and they'll add sparkle and all that other stuff, yes. But they'll have a list of ingredients. There's this list called the GRAS list, GRAS, stands for generally recognized as safe. So for instance, water is generally recognized as safe, but there are people who are allergic to certain taps, yes? So just because it's generally recognized as safe doesn't mean it's always recognized as safe. Peanuts, generally recognized as safe. Should you be aware that something is cooked in peanut oil? For people who have peanut allergies, you should definitely be aware something is cooked in peanut oil. It can cause inflammation that can literally choke you to death. Yes, so you have to be very aware of what you're purchasing and what is in it and how it's made. If it's especially something that's a chemical or somehow has storage responsibilities, in other words, something needs to be kept frozen, or it may need to be kept at room temperature, or it may need to be kept in a liquid form, it'll say that. And what happens if it's not? What happens if it catches on fire? What happens if you swallow it? What happens if you spill it on your skin? That's all in the material safety data sheet. Sometimes you're supposed to induce vomiting, sometimes you're not. Sometimes you're supposed to drink milk, sometimes you're not. That's all in the material safety data sheet. So if you have a product in a show that you wonder about, call the company. Now, for instance, I'm gonna say Hershey's chocolate, for instance, is something that is safe. Trust me, it's cocoa, which is great. But if you go to Hershey.com, there's a website, and on the website there'll be a thing called legal, and under legal there'll be a thing that you can click that's called the material safety data sheet, and you can hit print. So they are so sure that there's nothing dangerous in Hershey's chocolate that they will just allow you to print it straight off the internet. Now, Mr. Goodbar is an example of Hershey's chocolate that has peanuts in it. So again, do you need to be aware that somebody who has peanut allergy should not eat Mr. Goodbar? Yes. So there can be things, even on generally recognized as safe item, that you're going to have issues with particular people. If the product is particularly dangerous, just for example, I'll say cigarettes, it may on the package just have the city in which it was manufactured. It won't even have a zip code. Then it's up to you to go and find the city, and then find the name of the company, and then find the contact information, and then contact the people and say, hey, I would like a material safety data sheet. And they're going to typically say, I don't know what you're talking about. And you're going to say, well, it's required by the government. And they're going to say, well, you got to talk to this lawyer. And you're going to call that lawyer. And they're going to say, well, you got to talk to this lawyer. They're going to give you the pass around. Again, ultimately, you will find somebody that has to give you that form, but you're going to get the runaround because those items are not safe. They cause cancer. And people have sued companies like cigarette companies because of that. And so if you start asking questions, they're going to assume you're asking questions for that reason. Now, let's say on stage you decide to have the actors smoke herbal cigarettes. Is that really safer than a normal cigarette? I don't know. I'm not a scientist. I would have a material safety data sheet sent to me and say, what are the repercussions of smoking herbals? And if you can get one, and a lot of times you don't get them it can take a year or two to get these things, especially if it's a dangerous item. Yes, there was I don't want to say it's Ban roll-on deodorant several years ago, BAN, had mercury in it, and this was after mercury was proven to be a carcinogen. And suddenly it got almost impossible to get a material safety data sheet for Ban, and eventually Ban went bankrupt. And once people found out with the MSDS that a lot of people sued and made a lot of money because they were using an unsafe product, and then people knew it. They knew that it had mercury in it as the active agent to cause people not to sweat in their underarms, but it was causing them to have lymph node cancer. So anyway, just because somebody manufactures it doesn't necessarily mean it's safe, and just because it's on a GRAS list doesn't necessarily mean it's safe for everybody. So that's an example of something you can be aware of, and again, production manager can certainly help you take care of something like that. Again, I have general things on file that we use, paint, spray paints, that sort of stuff that we use every day. Not every day, but in our production, I have those material safety data sheets on file, just in case something like that were to happen, yes. If you have any kind of fire effect, flame effect, pyrotechnic effect, obviously those can cause major accidents. So you need to be excessively aware of how you handle those things. Even cigarettes or cigars, if you smoke them on stage, there are ways of pretending to, for instance, if you take baby powder and put it into a fake cigarette, and instead of breathing in, you blow out, it'll make a puff of smoke that looks like the person is puffing it. Now, it'll only do like 2 or 3 of those, so you can't really get it for somebody who's smoking an hour on stage. But they usually have a little filter thing on the end that sort of sparkles like it's a lit cigarette too. So they come up with some pretty unique ways of disguising fake cigarettes. Of course, vaping is another way of creating smoke on stage. It doesn't necessarily look exactly like a cigarette, but it's close enough, it gives you some smoke effect anyway. But it is certainly safer than I think cigarettes are. But the alternative is not to smoke. So I would encourage, if you ever have an opportunity to express an opinion, say, do we really, really need to smoke here? And oftentimes the answer is no. Now, sometimes the director's adamant, yes, we've got to. In which case, those actors have got to deal with that, repercussions of that. And you may have actors that don't do the show because of that. Again, it's just something to be aware of. There are all kinds of mist machines and Flame machines that are actually fabric, that are lights shown on flat fabric, especially if you can get more than 5 feet away from them, look incredibly realistic as fire flame effects. So there really isn't a reason to have fire on stage. If you have an open flame on stage, you should always have people with fire extinguishers on both sides of the stage in case there's an emergency before it spreads. You should also, if you have a cigarette or that sort of stuff, have a pail of sand on both sides so that the cigarette can immediately be extinguished into the fire can, that sort of thing. So you want to prepare for those instances. While we're on fire extinguishers, there are 5 different varieties of fire extinguishers, A, B, C, D, and all of the above. They both have different, they have different colors. They also have different shapes as far as their labeling, and they have different ingredients. Class A fire extinguishers are for water, usually. It's for paper fire. Class B fire extinguishers have the A fire extinguisher is green label. A Class B fire extinguisher is a red label, and it's got it's for flammable liquids and gases. Type C is electrical, and it's blue labeling. Yellow star is the Class D, and that's for burning metal. Again, I'm going to use a car as an example. It may have initially started as an A. In other words, you may have run over a piece of cardboard that was on fire, that then became a B because it burned some of the gas that was on the side of the car, that then became a D because it started burning the metal. So again, because of that, there's a 5th kind of fire extinguisher which just extinguishes everything. So you have to know what kind of fire extinguisher you have. Some of them, like A fire extinguishers, just have water in them. Some are what are called ABC fire extinguishers, which are typically carbon dioxide, because what it does is it pushes a cloud of carbon dioxide around the fire, which takes the oxygen away. You need to have a fuel, you need to have oxygen, and you need to have heat in order to have a fire. So if you can take one of those 3 elements away, and usually it's the oxygen that most people will take away. Yes? So here's a little short video on how to use a fire extinguisher.
A hazard that you can experience anywhere is fire. Understanding what causes fires can help you fight them. Here's an example of a fire triangle. A fire needs 3 elements: a fuel source, oxygen, and heat. Removing one or more of these elements will cause the fire to go out. For example, a ball of paper, your fuel source, sitting on a desk with air all around it, will do nothing. Now, if you add enough heat, the paper will combust. Knowing the source of fuel or heat feeding a fire is very important. There are 4 main types of fires. Class A for ordinary combustibles like wood or paper. Class B for flammable liquids like petroleum products and solvents. Class C for electrical fires. And Class D for metals fires. Don't assume that water is the best extinguisher for all fires. In the case of a Class B or C fire, using water to put out these types of fires could have dangerous results. For this reason, there are 4 categories of fire extinguishers. Each is designed for a different class of fire, but all are basically used the same way. You can find what class or classes of fire the extinguisher is meant to fight by looking at the label on the outside of the fire extinguisher. Water types are only to be used on Class A fires, while CO2 types can be used on A, B, or C fires. When encountering a fire, it is important that you are confident in your ability to put the fire out, and that you can fight the fire with your back toward an escape route. Operating a fire extinguisher is very simple. An easy method to remember to fight fires is the pass method. P for pulling the pin. A for aim at the base of the fire. S, squeeze the handle. And S for sweep the base of the fire. Remember not to aim high at the flames. Your spray should be concentrated at the base of the fire. Fire extinguishers are intended for small fires. In fact, most extinguishers are only able to operate for 8 to 10 seconds. If the fire is ever too large and has grown beyond its original confined space, your escape path is threatened, or if you're not sure if you have the correct type of fire extinguisher, abandon the fire, and get everyone to safety. Other hazards of fires to consider are smoke and noxious fumes that could result in unconsciousness or death. Fires can be prevented. Keep your work areas clean and clutter-free. Know how to handle and store the chemicals you work with. Familiarize yourself with an emergency action plan for fires at work as well as at home.
Boy, that was fun. You never know what you're going to get in this class, do you? Now, if you are, first of all, there's this person, usually in the city government. In our case, it's the fire marshal is the person who's the head, the chief of police at AUM. But there's usually a person called a fire marshal. And usually that person, it is nice to have them do what's called a walkthrough a couple of days before the show. Once everything is set, all the lights have been hung, all the rigging's been done, everything is there. There are certain rules about temporarily rigged things or temporary use of extension cords, that sort of thing, that allows for theatrical use. But the fire marshal will come through and tell you where they think there needs to be additional tape on the floor, or where they see wires that may be unsafe. So they're just another set of eyes to alert you to the possibilities that are there for damage or things that aren't working correctly. So I would encourage the theater, if they don't already have association with a fire marshal, to find a fire marshal, a local fire marshal, and have that person come and be a part of the plan for emergencies. Because they can also go through and plan with you where you should have people meet and that sort of thing. For instance, at AUM, if a fire alarm goes off, the audience is supposed to go to the circle where that little fountain is out there, and the actors are supposed to meet at the Grove, the little theater that's up on the top of the hill there. And that way, when you look around as a stage manager, you're supposed to count heads for just the actors. The house manager is responsible for the audience, patrons, that sort of stuff. And then if you realize that somebody is missing, then you can go back and find to see if you can find that person who might be missing. But that's our fire escape plan at AUM. Again, your local theaters should have some sort of fire escape plan. As a matter of fact, there was one theater I worked at in North Carolina where the producer notoriously would stand up in the middle of tech rehearsal at some point and just say fire. And he wouldn't necessarily scream it, he would just stand up and say fire. And everyone had to stop what they were doing as if a real fire alarm or a real fire was discovered. And that, trust me, it made you aware of what the fire procedures were, where the fire alarms were, where the escape places were, or the proper way to get egress an audience, to get the cast and crew out. It made everybody aware every single time. And because everybody who worked at that theater knew, they would always make sure that everybody else who was coming in knew the rules, which is one of the few places I ever went to where the first things I was told was how to get out in case of a fire, which is always nice to know in case there's a fire. So the evacuation procedures are very important. All right, just a more common sort of things. If there's a cue that happens, a shift that happens in a blackout, I would always insist that before you run it in the blackout, that you run it in full light, so that actors and crew members and everyone involved can see who the potential people are that need to get out of the way. Again, as you're planning your scene shifts, one of the people that you often forget about are actors. You've got the entire thing. You've got the wagons planned, you've got the flying scenery planned, you've got everything planned. You forget that there are 30 actors on stage that need to get off stage first, yes? And so run a shift in light, and then before you run the shift in black, I would then turn the lights out and have glow tape available, so that any actor who would plan their egress, you can put on the floor a runway of glow tape, or put on wagons, the edges of wagons, wherever there are, so that actors cannot trip over them. Doorways, I would put a piece of glow tape on the jamb and also on the door. So when the door is closed, you have 2 pieces of glow tape. When the door is open, you have 1 piece of glow tape. Yes? So again, glow tape whatever the actor feels necessary. Trust me, you're gonna have people complain about things looking like runways. Looking like runways is far better than having somebody fall through a hole, or having a wagon roll over somebody's foot and break it. There's not many audience members that are looking straight down at the stage. And even if they are, they're usually 2 kilometer feet away, which a little piece of fluorescent tape isn't going to bother that much. Although there have been times when I've gone to shows and seen the complete outline of the stage as I've looked down, yes. Running lights and ghost lights, having running lights, blue lights usually backstage to help actors to see backstage. They have these new LED lights that are great, look like little strings of Christmas tree lights that you can run along the floor that are almost unbreakable. And it's great because it gives you the edge of the walls. And because they're on the deck, you can see the floor and it shoots out onto the stage. And because they're deep blue, the actors, the audience really can't see them. And so they're fantastic. Again, at the end of the run of the show every night, when you turn all the lights off, I would always leave a ghost light on stage, because again, the thing about theater is that there are people like security guards, there's people like maintenance, there are people like janitors who come in and sweep and mop the audience. And because theater is constantly in a state of flux, it's just nice to leave a glowing light on stage so that anybody can see without, it's not as bright as the sun, but at least a light source that people can see to do their work by. Cool. Usually in theaters, especially theaters that have an orchestra pit, you're gonna have something called a deadline. It's usually where the number line is placed, and it's usually about 2 feet from the edge of the stage. And again, the reason for that is because you don't ever want an actor to get so close to the edge of the stage they fall in. So give them a good couple feet, put yourself a little white painted line on stage. It could be glow tape if you want, or just run your number line there. That serves the same purpose. And the actor should never cross downstage of that deadline. Yes. So just again, a nice little rule of thumb to have in your pocket of rules of thumb. Cool. So a little bit about health and safety. Again, paramount. If there's something that's unsafe, you should not do it and insist it not be done. Yes, because you don't want to have anybody hurt or have anybody. You don't want to be in an emergency room. That is for sure. Cool. For next class, you're gonna go to a rehearsal. This next class period, you're gonna come and see what a tech rehearsal looks like for Midsummer. And then a week from today, you're gonna have your prompt script due. Again, 3 sections. First section is the daily stuff like rehearsal reports, like contact sheets, like calendars, anything, character scene breakdown, all that sort of stuff goes in the front. All of it tabbed, so you can find it easily. The middle section is the script, and in the script you wanna have your blocking project. You also wanna have your cues indicated. Yes, your sound and light cues indicated. And then the back part is things like the set diagram, the properties list, the set and light cue sheets, that sort of thing, and the back of the script. Yes, so 3 parts to the prompt script, but that's not due till next week. This coming next class period, we're just gonna go to a rehearsal. Cool. All right, we'll see you at the rehearsal. Thanks.